Have you ever considered taking on an equity partner in your painting business? In this episode, I sit down with Jason Paris and we talk about his experience taking on partners, his decision process, and he offers some thoughts on folks who are considering this as an option for their business. I hope you enjoy. Hey, welcome to another episode, a very special episode of AlephVenturesTV. I am very happy to have the one and only Mr. Jason Paris. Thanks for joining again by popular demand.
My pleasure.
We're going to talk partnerships. Jason, you have partners in your business ventures today. Did you always plan on having partners?
No, I don't think that's the common thought going into any business or maybe getting right out of college is that you're going to take on partners. You kind of envision like I'm going to be a cowboy on my own on the old frontier. So probably not something that initially started out with as a thought.
When did that start to enter your calculus for your business?
I think as soon as I started to get employees. So as soon as I started to get employees, I was like, man, this would be easier with someone than just on my own. And so I actually tried multiple times to take on partners and failed. So I had tried with a friend of mine who was running a painting company. We were good friends in high school, and we kind of merged our companies. I bought his assets into the book of his business. He was not it just didn't work out. It's probably the kindest way to put it. So that didn't work out. I tried again with a buddy of mine from college who had also started a painting company. He was getting a little burnt out, wanted to kind of step down responsibilities and roles. So I bought his book of business, bought his assets. He came into the company. That also didn't work out super great. So it really was 0 for 2 before I took my third swing. And that was, of course, the infamous Chet Funk, which I know has gotten a lot of good hits on the show you did with him.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. So you had swings and misses. Why did you persist? I've talked to a lot of business owners, you have too, like who have bad experiences with partners or they try, it doesn't work out, whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's more common to then say, this isn't for me. I'm just going to figure this out on my own.
Sure.
Why did you press on?
Yeah, I think just probably conviction is why you press or anything, but just understanding and conviction of a partnership model that is successful. There's always the path to go it alone, and that's a great life, and to do that type of thing. That probably, after I'd gotten a couple of reps under my belt of running a business, I was probably pretty convicted that that wasn't the path I desired most long term. And I felt like I'd learned each time I'd kind of make a swung and miss on taking on a partner. So I felt like with the next iteration that I could eventually hit it.
Yeah. You mentioned conviction. So that maybe assumes kind of an underlying, you also mentioned model. So clearly there was this framework in your mind. Mm-hmm. A thing that I hear whenever I talk to folks about it, there are certainly those in the camp that are like, never give up equity. It's the dumbest thing you could do. You were operating with a different model. So why were you open to it though?
I think, it's the way that business is done, like in general in the economy. So maybe I just had more exposure. I had an econ degree out of the U of M. Was familiar with how equity is transferred and transitioned in large companies. So every Fortune 500 company operates with stock options and bonuses for their corporate team. You really want, I think at the end of the day, a vested management team that's running the business for the shareholders. So because I didn't grow, probably the best way I can answer that is I think a lot of people who it's just like a foreign concept to them or even offensive to them, they grew up in the trades. And I think in the trades, there's more of an entrenched mindset historically, I think has been changing. So I think without that, maybe that perspective or those observations of seeing it go well, it just doesn't enter into your thoughts. And I think there are reasons why trades partnerships in the past typically haven't gone well. So I'm not saying that that's without thoughtfulness or without good observation. But when you look at the economy as a whole and you look at different businesses outside the trades and you see how the partnership model can go very, very well, you're not thrown off by maybe what other people are more used to seeing just in the trades.
Why do you think that is from your experience or just getting to know people and hearing the stories? Like, why has it maybe not worked so well historically in the
Yeah, I
trades.
think so. I think about how we structure our partnerships and some of the wisdom that would give Chet a lot of credit for, which is that separation between equity and income. I think that's the thing that if you don't architect well, it's really, really hard to architect that in a way that is not designed for failure. It's kind of like an engineering principle. You're designing this for failure, the system for failure. So oftentimes what happens is two people come together, they say, let's work really hard together. Let's split the equity 50-50, and we're going to split the income 50-50. And what happens is 5 years later, 2 months later, 10 years later, 20 years later, one person is working really, really hard, doing very high level stuff. The other person is maybe working just as hard, maybe not working as hard, but doing things that in the marketplace would have much lower income. But what they've decided to do is just split the profits. And that becomes a weird, angsty thing. You're not quite sure how to reconcile that. I think that's the number one issue that causes partnerships to get wonky and weird, is they don't separate equity and from income.
Mm-hmm. I think too, there's been a little bit of painting businesses don't have these big exits. And so I also think that the sweat equity model sometimes gets borrowed from other industries. I don't know if you'd validate this, but like in a software business or something like that, where you might have some big windfall. It's like, yeah, I'll work for free, or
Sure.
I'll take stock options instead of compensation, or whatever the case may be. And they try to apply that to the painting industry. I think one of the things that I think Chet's done a good job of, you've done a good job of, is just embracing the industry that we're in.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the best partnership model for this industry?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important. If somebody hasn't necessarily considered it, maybe, they've grown up in the trades, their purview is a little limited. Like, what are the benefits to consider?
Another reason you oftentimes take on a partner is you're no longer the best person to be solely the equity holder in this new stage of business. So what often happens, I just go through my story, is I think I'm a really uniquely talented founder. I can get something from zero to something, and that requires a specialized skill set. That specialized skill set is oftentimes antagonistic from getting it from 1 to 10. It doesn't mean that I can't power through it and grit through it, but there's a team that I could bring on that would be much better at that and actually be a lot more profitable. And then doesn't just get to 10, it goes to 20 and sustains for a long period of time. It's very similar if you've been watching kind of the latest excitement in the NBA is Luka just got traded. And of course, that's because Mark Cuban is no longer the operating partner, which is not the model that we operate in. We allow the legacy owners to maintain as the operating partner. But Mark Cuban took on partners in his business, and he's kind of voiced that when he bought the company, the company needed someone who was kind of a tech CEO. It was a tech owner and a tech equity holder because he was in that tech space prior to owning the franchise. Now, if you look at where the NBA franchise landscape is going, if you want the valuations to continue to soar, you need to start getting good at land development and casino management. And that's why he took on partners who are really good at those things. If you hear him talk, it's nice for him to get some chips off the table and get some cash instead of just locked up equity. But he also talks pretty openly about, by the way, I still own 23% of this. If the valuations continue to rise to where I think that they can take it, I'm going to be a very happy boy. So sometimes you take on a partner and you think through, what are the future distributions that they're going to bring this to? And what does that look like for me? Is that better than what I could achieve on my own?
Yeah. I feel like there could be I just think of some of the conversations I've had this week with folks that I'm talking to. And for anybody listening that doesn't know, I sit in our director of development role. So I, walk folks through a discovery process and due diligence to see if a partnership with Aleph is a win-win. And as you sit there and say like, oh, I'm a good founder. I'm good at getting it from A to B, and somebody else. Were you always clear on what that line was, or was that a little bit of like, how did you know when you had taken it enough? Because I feel like that's identity is wrapped up into that a lot. I've found in conversations, and it's like, it's not easy or intuitive always to know when that is.
Yeah,
where that is.
I absolutely did not know that until like this last 4 months, I would say.
Okay.
So it just worked out really, really well. But I think part of that is just through experience. I was fortunate to surround myself with some amazing people who just became very, very clear that they were talented in very different ways. And I say that meaning that they could never do the things that I could do, but I could also never do the things that they could do, or they wouldn't desire to do what I could do, or I wouldn't desire to do what they could do. And so I think part of that lived experience is what taught me that. But, when you start a company, you have to have a high level of, not pride isn't the right word. You have to have a lot of self-belief. I mean, probably like an abnormal amount of self-belief to say like,
maybe especially for a painting company,
I'm going to start a painting company. I'm going to make it. I'm going to be the one that shoots off. So I certainly had that. And I think as you grow wiser and you grow older, got a few more gray hairs now, I can look back and say, here's what I was really, really good at. Here's where other people are able to step in. And when I allow that to happen, whether it's with Paris Painting, with Aleph Ventures, with our apartments, even in the time when I've been volunteering with the PCA, when I'm able to take it in my sweet spot and then step away from it, but still be a part of it, I benefit much, much more than if I try and hold on and keep it all mine.
So maybe if you were counseling or coaching yourself back then, because part of the reason we put together videos and episodes is for folks who have thought about, what does Aleph do? Might that partnership model be something I'm interested in, or could it be a good thing for my company? Or maybe we're going through discovery and there's resources to get to know us. What questions would you ask yourself to just help evaluate? Like, do I need a partner? Is now the time? Is this the right partner?
I mean, timing is probably the toughest question to give advice on. It's more like, are you aligned with that vision philosophically? It's kind of like asking, giving myself advice on when is the right time to put cash in the market versus take cash out of the market. And the true answer is time in the market beats timing the market. And so I think first just getting clear on, do you conceptually want to take on a partner, or do you conceptually want to run this by yourself for the long term? That is probably the advice. And I was pretty clear on that pretty early on. So I'd just be reinforcing that with myself, saying, hey, do you have a clear vision of where you want to get to, what you want this to look like, versus trying to say, when do I buy, when do I sell? It's more like, do you want to play the markets in general?
Yeah. What would you say are maybe misconceptions people have about giving up equity or taking on partners? I don't know, even to what have you been asked over the years as it's like, Jason, you have a partner. What does that mean?
Probably the biggest misconception is that it's an easy button.
Okay.
Very similar to the question I used to get asked. This used to be I think partnership has replaced subcontractors as the new debate over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there was a big debate between subcontractors and W-2. I think the biggest misconception that time is that scaling with subcontractors was an easy button. It required different skill sets and different abilities to scale subcontractors, and it wasn't easy. It was actually very challenging. Same thing with taking on partners. It's not an easy button. It doesn't mean that you just get to put your feet up and relax all day. Hopefully you do get there, and that's the life that I've gotten to live, which is a fun one. But it certainly isn't easy. I think it's a different kind of work. Instead of kind of grinding through and carrying the burden on your own shoulders, you now get to go through some of the ego trauma of saying that others are going to do this with me and may be better at it. I'm going to let some things go, and I'm going to toe that line between what do I want to make control over, or what do I want to have influence on. And I think that requires a different type of challenge, but I think it's in some ways as challenging.
Do you think there's, maybe on the flip side of this, are there scenarios, setups, types of businesses, types of people that you would say, I don't think you should partner. I don't think now would be a good time, or that this model would work for you?
Yeah, I think if someone has, if the business really is their identity, again, nothing's easy in life. There's no free lunch. Letting go is going to be very, very tough for you. So if it is your identity, it's what you kind of wrap your whole self-worth around, I would not recommend partnership. That's probably going to be an ugly experience for both parties. And just what's your kind of risk tolerance and your lifestyle desires. To make a partnership work, you oftentimes have to scale the equity so you can scale the distributions. Right? If you have half of the pie and you used to have the full pie, the pie should be twice as big before it makes sense financially for that transaction to work out. So you then have to be willing to ride that growth with your partner, as opposed to you can just stay at your current size and maybe it's a little more comfortable because you're not stretching yourself. You work super hard. You've built a lot of relationships, so things just kind of happen. You can pull the cash out, put it in real estate. That's not a bad life. It just is, what kind of life do you want to build? Do you want a really great job that pays you good income, but also good distributions, or you want to build an asset that will continue to provide income independent of your energy and effort. And it's much more stabilized with a group of people as opposed to just maybe you and your team.
Yeah. How about just thinking, I've heard you talk about before, initially, whenever you started your business, it was like $1 million. If I can just get this thing to $1 million, it's like, where am I going to park my yachts?
Yeah.
My goodness. And then just what's possible. How did partnership influence that? Like, did partnering was there any impact of just, I don't know, what's possible with my business or where could my business
I
go?
probably experienced what some of the people that we partner with now experience, which is the vision. Chet was my first partner that I took on, and his vision was much larger than what I was dreaming of. And so I had kind of ideas for Paris painting and where it could go, and all the fun things we could do. And then there's part of my mind thinking like, okay, I see this as a vehicle to something, but I can't quite visualize what next is. And Chet came in with some great ideas, and we've gotten to live that out as a fruition. And I think when you take on partners, they kind of have to be bought into. They're oftentimes that they're putting their skin in the game, they're putting their energy and effort on the line. So they should have a compelling vision of why they're willing to yoke up into this endeavor. So sometimes hearing, why are they interested in taking this on? Why are they interested in becoming a partner in this business? That kind of opens your horizon on what the vision could be.
Yeah. What maybe just expand this to the industry as a whole. Like, what do you think is possible for, and I guess maybe residential repaint is the space that we camp out in. I know you talk a lot about the industry and what you see and the trends and stuff like that, but what do you think is what do you think is possible? Like, how many big painting companies can these markets sustain? Or because I think part of this is, I mean, to your point, you said this earlier, but we believe it's like you don't partner to stay the same size. Mm-hmm. You partner to grow, and you do need to grow a good bit, depending on what level of partnership you take on. If everybody does that, are you going to get this proliferation of much bigger companies? But I don't know. I'm just curious, like, what's your thought on just what is possible and how does that look different?
Yeah. There's kind of like three thoughts I want to hit. So first is there is a scenario, and I think I've ran into it recently where let's say there's a guy, he's got a $15 million painting company. He's in his 60s. He's tried to do a transition. It didn't go well. And he's thinking, can I take on a partner who can just run this company and I can keep some equity for my family? That when he's probably not super interested in growing it. He just wants someone to come in and actually take the load off. He's tried to do a transition. It didn't work. He's had to come out of retirement, jump back in the business. As far as what I think it will look like, I think it probably will be that best-in-class model seems to be winning out. The only other large-scale model that's out there are the franchises. Those have done a lot of great things for the industry. But if I'm going to get a little spicy, I'd say the best thing they've done for us is they create really grateful labor and really grateful clients for Paris painting, because they operate very poorly, and that's just probably more in the numbers than anything. But I think the best-in-class model will just clean house over the franchises. And then you can start getting into, market analysis to say how many big companies, quote unquote, big companies could sustain in each metro area. Or you can get more philosophical and say, what is the true cap of painting when you're dealing with the fulfillment and satisfaction of people. So just because somebody needs a paint job painted every 8 years so that their substrate doesn't fall apart, doesn't mean that they don't want a paint job every 4 years. What if they want a paint job every 2 years? What if they wanted a paint job every single month? So I think marketing will help drive what the true demand is in painting.
How about just evaluating the right partner? So I think there's maybe just the initial conceptually, from a vision standpoint, am I open to this model or this way of doing business, doing life? How about evaluating if somebody is open to that? Yeah. It's like, okay, is this the right partner?
I'll just speak for myself. So I take on partnerships in pretty much everything I do, whether it's in business ventures, in real estate transactions, or in raising a family. I partner in all of those endeavors. There's nothing that I do on my own. And I've got great partners in all those areas. So I'm a very lucky boy. But I think character would be number one for me. So just when I look for a partner, and whether it's real estate or business, or when I took on my spouse, character is number first. Are they going to do the right things when nobody's watching? Right? Do we value the same things? Second thing would be the common sense of purpose. A lot of times this is in how you architect the deal terms. And that's something I think we've done really, really well, is do we have a common sense of purpose, right? The third one would be, what is their competency, right? Do I believe that they can get the job done? Do they have a track record of doing this well? Sometimes when you marry somebody, you're kind of taking a step of faith, and you do that knowing some of the core foundation and being open to things that could happen in the future. But for me, whenever I work in, whether it's real estate or businesses, do they have a high level of competency? I'm not looking to take a big flyer on that one.
And how about just on like the character piece? I want to go back to that, like flesh out more of, is there certain elements of character that are more important in a partnership context than, I mean, I don't know, like there's different varying levels of relationship, right? Yep. So you can be friends with somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know, you could almost be like good partners with somebody.
Yeah.
And have a less of a friendship.
Yeah.
But have a really good friendship with somebody, but never want to partner
probably
with them.
The character trait would be integrity.
Okay.
Right. So they do what they say they're going to do. Are they the same person up front as they are, behind the back door? That's probably the biggest one. Whether we both believe that caffeine is a sin or not, that's probably less of a character issue when it comes to partnership.
Sure.
But integrity and are you the same person all the time?
Yeah. If somebody is thinking that a partnership might be something for them to consider, I don't know, would you recommend any first steps? And I want this to be generally applicable. Obviously, Aleph partners with painting businesses. We're happy to talk to anybody who's considering that, but there's different options out there. And so just like some initial steps.
Yeah, I think even just for the audience that watches here, first getting clear to yourself what you desire is something that I like working with people on. So what do you actually want? And then verbalizing that to yourself, writing it down, just so you're clear on why you're taking the action that you're taking. So getting a clear vision and then documenting that vision would probably be the first step. From there, I'm a big fan of like network and referrals. So kind of pinging the people that who have you heard about? Do you have any recommendations of where I could start? Those two things will get you pretty far. And then from there, there's probably a lot of tactical advice I could give, but those are the good two strategic items.
Yeah, I would validate whenever I get into a conversation with somebody, if they have gone through, obviously traction is a very popular model, the EOS system. And so the vision traction organizer, but I've seen people that have similar things. If they've done that and they've done some of that work and thinking, and then I step in and we start having that conversation of like, is Aleph a good partner? It makes it way easier to have that conversation. It is much, and it just good intentions on both sides. But if we're kind of in real time trying to figure out, what do you want to do with your business, and where do you hope to be in 3 years or 5 years?
Yeah. The last thing for us as a partner is we don't want to be the persuasive party either. And I think a lot of people would look at my story and they find some element of me that they catch on to. And so they think, oh, I want to be like Jason. Separate out, my awesome cat memes and the Nyan cat, hobby horsing. Like those are all cool things. You should think about what do you want in your business and how do you want to grow it? How do you want to scale it? As opposed to just trying to mimic because someone that does something some way.
Speaking of hobby horsing and cat memes and stuff like that, just the impact outside of the business. I think, I don't know, this is something, I don't know exactly the number, but I have 5 kids. You have 5 kids.
Mike has 5 kids.
Like we're family centric. Aleph is a very family centric bunch. And I would say that definitely shapes, like we're not trying to work 100 hours a week, be gone all the time. Is there anything you would hold out of just kind of the quality of life impact of a partnership, like things to consider or why somebody might do that? And I don't want to necessarily just assume that that's intuitive because it's not an easy button. Right. But I don't know, how important was that for you?
That was
thinking about a partner.
Primary driver for me. I would say I've been very pleasantly surprised how well it's gone financially. But I was really looking forward to how do I not shoulder this on my own, knowing everything that I want to do in life. Like at that time, I had 2 kids. We were expecting a third. I was like, yeah, I can keep grinding this out, but I think this could be a lot more fun. I think life could be a lot more fun. And I do more than just hobby horsing. I have my private pilot's license. I like to run ultra endurance races. I'm doing the Moab 240. There's a lot of fun things that I do outside of the silly things. Yeah, it was not an easy button. There were a few years where, I think the right way to approach a partnership is both sides feel like they're the fortunate one. They want to prove to the other side that they're worth that commitment. So I certainly approached the first few years of me taking on partners in that type of an attitude. And I've been pleasantly surprised how well it's gone financially. I think we've fulfilled both ends of the bargain when it comes to the time freedom that I now get to enjoy, because the company has gotten to a stage mutually together, all of us filling our roles together to where it is now. But for me, that's a big element and I always say I'm retired now, quote unquote retired. And I always say there's so much more to life than just work, right? And my days are just as busy as ever, but not with income generating activities.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I came on in June of 2017, and you had just 2 kids at the time?
It must have been, yeah, just a few kiddos. Wow. And honestly, those are the years I was sleeping in the office.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was grinding hard. And again, I always took that attitude of, I felt like my partners could leave at any time. I was like, I want this to be something that they see the light on and want to be invested in. And I think my attitude those couple of years helped us all achieve great things together. And that'd be my advice for anybody that takes on a partner, even with Aleph Holdings, is it's not an easy button. Both sides should be approaching it saying, I want this other person to feel like they made the right decision. Just like in a marriage, right? I think the best marriages are where both couples feel like they're the lucky ones. They're constantly trying to feel like, oh, how do I fully bless this person for all that they're doing for me? As opposed to probably a bad marriage is one that keeps track of the tallies and who did it this day and this day. And I think most bad partnerships are that way too, where both sides are keeping track and they're saying, well, I mean, who's the better partner and who's working harder or less harder? And I certainly could have taken that attitude and gotten pretty sour grapes pretty quick. But I think I've just lived a life where I've gotten to see that the more you give, the more you get.
Yeah, and that's maybe a dynamic too of whenever you have, so 50-50 is one thing. If you do have a disparity in equity, there's a majority owner and a minority owner. What do you think about that? And frankly, this is something that just a dynamic that is very real to us at Aleph that we're growing in and working on, but just this dynamic of like majority managing partner, minority partner. Like, can you say anything about just like setting expectations around that?
Yeah. Well, there's equity distribution. There's also just the managing partner. And the managing partner doesn't always have to be the majority owner. But the managing partner carries the weight of really delivering at the end of the day on the P&L and the equity growth. So it's usually tied into equity, but not always. It certainly was not in Paris Painting. So that was a fun part, is I got to step back as the managing partner and not be that operating partner and still contribute, but not have to carry the load. But also, the operating partner did not have majority equity. And so that was a unique dynamic that I got to experience. But I think as long as you lay those things out clearly in the operating agreement, that's where there could just be a plethora of unspoken expectations to get wonky quick. Again, why do I think that their partnerships are the only ships that don't sail, has been the saying in the trades. I think a lot of that comes from poor architecture. I think it comes from not having a clear vision and clear purpose for why you would partner. It just doesn't make sense without a compelling vision. And then are you separating your distributions and your equity from your work and your income? Without those things, it can get pretty wonky pretty quick.
How about the person who's listening to this and maybe they're in a bad partnership? So they made that decision and it's not going well. What advice, counsel, thoughts would you have for them?
Well, if it's a marriage, they should talk to their pastor at their local Catholic church. But if you're in a partnership that's not going well, communication is the number one thing. So I think any partnership that I've been a part of that's gone really, really well, it starts with a base level of communication. We don't think things fester. You bring them up, you communicate. I've also been in some partnerships that are dysfunctional and don't go really well. I think that comes from a base level of not great communication. So things happen, they're not really spoken about. There's not clear crossroads. So that would be.
Let's slow down on that. Like flesh out even more. You kind of are mentioning some things, but it's like on a weekly, monthly, meeting by meeting basis, what does it mean to have good habits of communication and partnership?
Yeah, and I think if something, so again, whether it's in marriage or in business, if something that irritable pops up, you just address it right away. Like, hey, I don't know if you meant to say that, but when you said it this way, this is how I felt. It kind of irked me a little bit. Or like, oh gosh, we just had this business meeting, and I don't know if you meant to do this, but you shaded my cell red, and it made me feel like you didn't like me. Oh, I meant to do green. Did I do red? Yeah, you did. Oh, okay. I'm glad we talked about it, because I was gonna have retribution against you, and this could have gotten out of control really quick. Or they might say, yeah, I did mark it red because I feel like you've been underperforming. Like, oh gosh, okay, I feel like I've been overperforming and I'm undercompensated. Like, let's talk through that. So those are just tactical examples of what it means to race to conflict. Would be the water buffalo that goes into the storm. I think that's a kind of clear principle of a good relationship.
Yeah, that's good. A book I recently read called Getting to Yes. I forget the author, but he introduced this concept. It's on deals and kind of negotiation, but this concept of be hard on the problem and soft on the people. And so, but I think there's a way to, like, conflict can be like a scary bad word, but I think there's a reframing of what conflict can mean, that like conflict is inevitable. It's kind of like strength training. Like pain is inevitable if you're going to be sore.
If you want to grow, if you want to have a winning team.
But conflict doesn't have to mean that like the person's a bad person, or even lack of performance sometimes doesn't mean you're a bad person. Like you might need help, you might need a better structure or whatnot. And so being hard on the problem, soft on the people, I think, I don't know, that is a helpful way of like.
So someone's in a bad partnership, or they're in a partnership where it's probably race the conflict, have communication. I guess the other advice I would be is assume the best intentions. Right. And so if you approach it in those two ways, hopefully you can get somewhere with it, but at least you've started the ball rolling in a way that'll get you to a resolution one way or another. That'd be another element of partnerships that unfortunately I don't see architected very well, is how does this thing unravel? How does this thing end? How do we deal with this bad day? That's something I think we're really good at Aleph. I've always, in all my businesses and the businesses we invest in, is doing some type of an annual evaluation. No one expects these things to blow up. No one expects anybody to die. But in the event that somebody dies, and in the event that something happens, we have some kind of a groundwork, because what usually happens is the partners get into an argument. Somebody wants to leave. Somebody wants to stay. The person that wants to leave thinks the company is valued a lot. The person that wants to stay thinks that they should pay a little amount. And what usually happens is they both go to a lawyer, then they go to court, they fight, they come a little bit closer. If you add up the court fees and the legal fees and what they ended up paying, it would have met right in the middle anyways. But I think that's a healthy rhythm, because I do it with all my partners, and every year we go in and I don't know if they're going to die or if I'm going to die. And I start to think like, oh, if I'm going to die, I want the price to be really high. But then I start thinking, oh no, if they die, I want the price to be low. But since I don't know who's going to die, I end up just setting on a fair price, and then we all agree to it.
So, I mean, on that topic, that's your, kind of these post partnership dynamics with value. But this is something too that can get dicey, is just how to value your company, valuation. Yeah. And again, these are things that it's like you don't have to really worry about or think about unless you partner. So valuation is kind of one of these interesting things where it kind of matters a lot in some ways, in the sense of how good is the business doing, or is it like, are you creating value? Like, that's the point of building a business, is to create a valuable thing, right? A thing that a value generator. But then if you never have partner or sell or anything like that, you don't really have to look at it. But I'd be curious, just for folks who are maybe valuing their company for the first time, or they start thinking about that, like, I don't know, any mindset advice for leaning into that?
I mean, I would value it the way you value any asset. And so think of it as an investor. And the way most great and good investors think of is they're trying to secure future streams of cash flow. And then what is the likelihood of that cash flow? So the example I like to give is if you're going to buy land sitting underneath a CVS store, that is going to be a very stable stream of cash flow. You're going to collect a coupon once a year. You're going to put it in the bank. It's very, very stable. If you're going to buy a painting company that's run by a very unique founder that's impossible to replace, and they're running off of intuition and recall, and gosh, you hope Susie never quits. You can invest in that, but it's definitely not as stable as that CVS parking lot. And in between that are bonds and stocks and all sorts of things. So just kind of think, if I were an investor, how would I look at this? There's certainly upside. There's also downside. There's inherent instability. Just try and think of it holistically. I know that way we value it is pretty standard. We typically do a multiple of the profit and just call it a day, and we end up being a pretty generous investor in that way. But think about making the pitch to someone like the Shark Tank and see how think about how that would go.
Yeah. Would you say, I mean, there is this element of partnering helps some of that separation from identity. Like you, I don't know, to think like an investor or to consider an outside investor, you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes of what's valuable to them, Sometimes too, I think there's a book with this title. I haven't read it, but this idea of like build to sell. What are your thoughts on that? Like build to sell, even if you never intend to, or I don't know. Do you think that's a good approach? Would you recommend?
I guess it depends on your vision. So again, if you wanted it to be like, hey, I want to work in this business and on the business for a long, long, long time. I don't plan on ever selling. I don't plan on taking on a partner. I'm not going to pass this down to anybody. I would advise that person to just, squeeze and take all the golden eggs and never feed the goose. Get all the cash out you can every single year. Don't reinvest. Don't build a team. Don't do leadership development. Don't build technology. Don't do SOPs. Just take that cash. But not everybody has that vision. And for those who don't, building to sell is a good way to, maybe another way to say, of like build for stability and build for the opportunity to have an asset that will produce you cash flow independent of your energy and effort. And I think that is a good principle, a good guideline to follow. So it depends on your vision.
Yeah. Man, appreciate you taking the time
My pleasure.
To have the conversation, and we'll have to have you on again.
Anytime.
Thank you.
My pleasure.